I learned a lot listening to Manly P. Hall lectures when I was younger. And I know there are people who just think simply Freemason equals bad, but there's like a world of difference between him and, say, Albert Pike, who was a Southern pro-slavery general. But I did want to ask you this. Now, there's a lot of questions I have about your book, but just one more Manly P. Hall thing.
Sure.
So if you look up his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, at CIA.gov, which it is there, it includes this endorsement by John Bruno Hare that reads, "For once, a book which really lives up to its title." Hall self-published this massive tome in 1928, consisting of about 200 legal-sized pages in 8-point type. It is literally his magnum opus. Each of the nearly 50 chapters is so dense with information, it is the equivalent of an entire short book. If you read this book in its entirety, you will be in a good position to dive into subjects such as Kabbalah, alchemy, tarot, ceremonial magic, Neoplatonic philosophy, mystery religions, and the theory of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. Although there are some questionable and controversial parts of the book, such as the outdated material on Islam, the portion on the Bacon-Shakespeare hypothesis, and Hall's conspiracy theory of history as driven by an elite cabal of roving immortals, they are far outweighed by the comprehensive information here on the subject. Well, what are your thoughts on that assessment? The book isn't exactly fresh in my mind. It's been maybe 15 years, but the idea that history is driven by an elite cabal of roving immortals is probably one of my favorite ways to describe such a thing, or maybe my favorite part of such a book. What do you think?
I had a talk with him about that. I mean, first of all, how did it get on the CIA page and why? And I mean, that I don't have an answer to that, but it always stuns me. And there was a time when he was, I knew him when he was in his 80s, near the end of his life. He was not political at that point. He would sometimes refer to America's secret destiny and things along those lines, which were popular themes for him. His most popular lecture ever was about the secret destiny of America, given in Carnegie Hall during World War II. And I think that he felt a loyalty to that subject. But how he wound up there, I don't know. Now, my understanding is that he had a relationship with Mayor Yorty in Los Angeles, that Ronald Reagan, supposedly, when he was governor, came by to meet with him once or twice. But I wasn't around when any of that was happening, and I don't know what he was trying to do at that point. When I knew him, I asked him about this whole idea of the invisible masters, which he really acquired from theosophy. He was very influenced by Blavatsky in the beginning. When he was a kid starting out, he was all about the secret doctrine and Isis Unveiled and the theosophical, and also the Rosicrucian teachings of Max Heindel, which were quite similar. And in both of these traditions, there is that idea of these roving invisible masters who really are pulling the strings. Now, the funny thing is that they're supposed to be good, right? Like in Manly Hall's point of view, these are not evil elitists who are keeping all of us ignorant and taking all the wealth of the world and trying to dominate everything. These are people who are trying to save us from ourselves, who are trying to block the evil elites who are trying to control everything and who are trying to bring goodness into the world. That's how he saw it. So when he said New World Order, for example, I just recently put up a lecture that I gave at PRS back in the 80s called Marriage in the New World Order. And this was an example of when I had to lecture for him when he wasn't up to coming out on a Sunday morning, and he picked the titles, right? So I was like, oh, Jesus, Marriage in the New World Order. So I asked him, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by New World Order? And he saw it in this beautiful, idealistic kind of, only thing I can use as an example would be kind of like the Star Trek, Federation of Planets or something. It was this highly elevated. It was also related to this idea that I talk about in the book of the College of Light, which was something that the great educator Comenius came up with, and that later in America, John Winthrop the Younger tried to implement and failed because, unfortunately, a war broke out with the indigenous tribes, and the European intelligencers and alchemists and philosophers and proto-scientists that he tried to bring out to all get together in one area and be like this college of light. That didn't happen. But the idea was that you gather up all the most intelligent people, all the people who are seeking to understand creation and how to live both in the physical and spiritual dimensions, and you get them all working together, and then you share that information with everyone. So the more people that become enlightened by that information, then the better the world becomes. That was the idea of the New World Order there. It seems, even then, it seemed naive to me, right? In the same way that there was this idea at the society that if only the world would understand Bacon's great approach, and that he was behind Shakespeare, and that he was behind the Rosicrucians, and he was behind the foundation of America, and if the world could realize that, it would change everything. And Tamara put it beautifully, because she said, the people that I grew up around, they were into Bacon, but it wasn't Francis. And our idea was, nobody cares. Like, most people don't care who wrote Shakespeare or any of that stuff. But the society had this, everybody was so devoted. It was this beautiful, serene, like little Pythagorean community or something. And there, it seemed like there could be a new world order, and that people would be enlightened and inspired. And in a sense, I was an example of that happening, right? Because I was inspired by what I read in that book. But I did have an opportunity to speak to him about it. And I said, it happened because I asked him, if you had it all to do over again, what would you do differently? And this was just between us. And he said that he would not have emphasized all the invisible master stuff the way he did so strongly in his youth. He said that instead, instead, I would have said, and he actually wrote this in one of his last books, that who are the Rosicrucians? They're not invisible superhumans. They're us. They're people who devoted themselves to Rosicrucian ideals, finding out how to heal, and then healing people who couldn't afford it for free, standing up for the innocent and the weak, fighting against religious tyranny, bringing science together with philosophy and religion, and all of these ideas. And so he had changed in his approach, even in that last book, he still went in there and he started talking again about these invisible group, not really invisible, but secret orders that were still working to help us along. But he also said that he felt that he would have emphasized that before anyone begins studying any area of metaphysics, they should familiarize themselves deeply with some area of psychology of their choice, because he felt that for people who have psychological issues, that when they take those issues untreated into metaphysics, it amplifies them. And then you can get all kinds of terrible experiences, which he spent much of his life counseling. And when I was his screener, my job was basically, on the one hand, make sure that people who wanted to meet him for reasons that were intended for their own self-benefit and may have been detrimental to his reputation were screened out. But my main job was talking to all the people who needed help, who were trying to reach him as a sort of last resort because they had done ceremonial magic and they realized they didn't close the circle properly, and it freaked them out. And then they believed they were being haunted by entities that were ruining their lives. Or the same kind of experience occurring in spiritualism, where somebody got in touch with a spirit that was talking to them and then wouldn't leave them alone, or was telling them things that were disturbing. Or people who had lost the ability to function in day-to-day life because they had become so deeply immersed in the esoteric that instead of it building them up and opening their soul, it was turning them into these kind of recluses who were unable to function any longer. And they all wanted to talk to people that were growing third eyes, they thought, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was an eye-opener, man, to talk to that side of the metaphysical world and see how much damage was done. Now, of course, the same thing happens in every religion. And I mean, almost any human activity can create that issue. And that's why I think he suggested that people needed to have some awareness of psychology so they could understand the shadow and the unconscious and kind of have more stability and groundedness. So I think that I don't know, I think there was a level at which he did kind of believe that there was a potential, let's say, of this kind of thing occurring. And it's not very different from Mahayana Buddhism, where you have these great masters who supposedly achieve the ability to transcend the physical body and can sort of teleport themselves or some aspect of themselves and communicate with people. And we have many, many stories throughout the history of metaphysics, especially in alchemy, of worthy seekers suddenly finding someone in their room who gives them what they need to accomplish the great work. And sometimes they show up in dreams and that kind of thing. So I think on a level, he felt that there was something very comforting about that. I fell deeply into that for a time because I was like, okay, well, if he says it's real, this was in the beginning, then I guess it must be real. So I want to meet an initiate. I want to be an initiate. I want to be one of these invisible guys. And so what do I have to do? So I started to read up all the stuff and I changed my diet. I became celibate as much as I could. I did all the things that I thought I needed to do to become an initiate. And it got me into trouble because I started doing things like I met somebody at a bookstore who needed somewhere to stay, and she claimed that she was a high level of attainment and that she had this fusion information about fusion experimentation that could change the world. And she moved into our place, and like I couldn't get rid of her. Like she was a total hustler. And so I went one night with Tamara to the Hall's house, and I'll never forget. It was a storm was going on. We were sitting in a dark room, and the lightning was lighting up the room. And I started telling him the story of what had occurred, and I didn't know what to do. I was like, if I throw her out, then I'm not going to be an initiate, right? I mean, that's not an initiate thing to do. And well, he laughed his ass off, Greg. I mean, he thought it was the funniest thing, And then he said, throw her out. And he said, tell her that I said that if she doesn't leave, to call the police. So you see, he understood that whole concept had a lot of negative baggage going with it. But I think on another level, he felt like it was a comfort to hopeless people. And that maybe he even felt himself that, but maybe there are, maybe there are people of such high attainment and they're out there trying to help however they can. Because when I knew him, he was deeply into Buddhism and Taoism. And in those traditions, there is the tradition of the Immortals, right? Of people who achieve such attainment that they kind of transcend the limitations that we all have to deal with. So I think that he was split about that subject, but he was very aware not to take it too literally. And he tried to kind of calm people down, including me, about it. And I eventually grew out of that. Tamara called it initiate fever. And I think that's a great term for it. And I think it's something that happens often for people when they start out in metaphysics and they're so ambitious to achieve, and they hear that story. Now, in our society, as you point out, that's become a source of fear. And the idea that there's these evil reptilians. And here's the funny thing about it, that science is taking us rapidly to a place where something very similar is highly probable, right? Because when you talk about genetically enhanced kids of people who are wealthy enough to afford that, where a kid can be given a super high IQ, a metabolism that could, they could live to be 150 or something, you're creating these sort of elites, this higher level economically, made possible by their wealth, kind of another kind of humanity that could occur in the future as these kids are genetically tinkered with. And so I think that's part of the reason that the fear of these initiates of high level is ringing in the consciousness of humanity right now, because there are very concerted efforts to make that kind of elite a reality.
Yes. Well, that's the promise. We will see how that truly manifests. I think we might get Frankenstein Island of Dr. Moreau kind of thing. That
I kind of hope so myself. I mean, I hope it's not that free and easy, that just I have a lot of money and I can live twice as long as you and be connected to AI in my brain. So good luck dealing with me.
Right.
But
there'll be downfall.
It could be interesting. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's also good to remember on the other side. I like to point out to people that as Plato captures in the dialogues, Socrates and a lot of other very wise ancient Greeks were very upset about the introduction of books, of scrolls. The written word was dangerous. This was a new technology that was going to ruin society. And of course, there's some truth in the fact that when you're alone with your book, you can read things into the words that if you had the author or a teacher there, you might not slip into those kind of mistakes.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2-hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right.
The Higherside Chat Show. Greg Carwood.